Hey guys, I'm Naguura, and today we're gonna go over a Mythic Plus dungeon that I played. I'm just gonna explain my thoughts and process, what I have been doing to help you out a little with your rotation. I already uploaded a Moon King guide specifically on my channel that you can check out. Actually, there's two guides. One is a basic guide and one is a more in-depth guide. But people are still very confused on what they should be doing on any sort of AoE scenario or in Mythic Plus. So I'm gonna just comment over this video to make sure that you guys understand my thought process and my playstyle so you can maximize your DPS on M+ as well. Alright, so I paused this video real quick because I wanted to talk about the talents. You can see the talents that I'm running here. I'm running Force of Nature, very important. Don't get fooled by not running Force of Nature. This is incredibly important. Force of Nature is the only viable talent in Mythic Plus. Not only does it taunt, which is incredibly great for utility, but it also does a lot of damage. Like, people are forgetting about the damage that Force of Nature does, because not only do the trees do damage themselves, but they also give you 20 Astra power when you put them, which can help you out to just cast another Starfall or get another Star Surge out on a boss or something like that. So definitely don't get fooled by Nature's Balance. A lot of people are saying, but I need Nature's Balance because I want the 50 Astra power when I go into a pack to be able to Starfall. It's actually a misconception that Nature's Balance gives you 50 Astra power when you go into a pack, because the only time Nature's Balance realigns your Astral power to 50 is when you're out of combat for a really long time. And in M+, you're not out of combat for a long time, ever, unless you're doing it wrong, right? If you're playing the M+ dungeon correctly, then you're going from pack to pack to pack to pack, into Pride Mob, into boss, into whatever, and the time you're spending outside of combat is very short. So usually you're not even losing Astra power, like you don't even start to get into this idling phase where you realigning your Astra power. It doesn't ever even happen, right? So the point of having Nature's Balance is completely irrelevant if you want that 50 Astra power. Because before you enter the dungeon, you can actually already pool Astra power. So what you can do is you attack the mobs, or you attack a turnip, and then you start a key immediately after you get out of combat. If you do that, then you can already go into the key with a lot of Astra power, meaning that you don't need that 50 Astra power from Nature's Balance. And afterwards, you're just going from pack to pack to pack, meaning that you can just pool Astra power from the previous pack before you go into the next. That's something people either don't do or they do it wrong, right? If you're fighting a mob or a pack, don't use all of your Astra power until the very, very end, right? If the mobs are on 10% HP, then don't cast another Starfall. Don't cast another Star Surge. Just save your Astra power, so when you go into the next pack right afterwards, you have that Astra power to cast a Starfall, right? So definitely just adjust your playstyle accordingly, and please run Force of Nature. If you don't know how to use Force of Nature properly, then ask your tank when he wants Force of Nature. One thing people maybe misunderstand with Force of Nature is that they only taunt one time, the trees. They only taunt on the initial position that you put them in. They have a radius, right? And in that radius, they taunt. The mobs that are outside of the radius, they don't taunt those, right? So definitely make sure you put them properly and put them when your tank needs them. Depending on what tank you're playing with, if you play with a Demon Hunter, for example, then you probably don't want to put them when the Demon Hunter is in demon form, right? Because then he's pretty tanky. Just make sure you communicate with your tank and put them whenever they're out of CDs, or even you can make sure in your raid frames, make sure you see the cooldowns of the tank. Like, for example, if you can look at my grid here, you see that at the bottom I see Barkskin and Survival Instincts of my Guardian Druid here. So when he's got Survival Instincts up, I probably don't want to use the Force of Nature, so I'm waiting until the Survival Instincts is gone, and then I put Force of Nature. Then you also want to play around and plus affixes. If you have Sanguine, you don't want to put the trees at the very end of the pack, because then the trees don't move and they're tanking mobs in Sanguine. So you want to make sure you're putting the trees at the start of the pack. Also make sure you communicate this to the tank, so the tank doesn't use defensives immediately, but rather saves defensives for the end of the pool, because you need to use your trees at the start to make sure that they're not tanking something in Sanguine, right? So just communicate with a tank and use your trees accordingly. Then moving on with the talents, everything else is pretty straightforward. Soul of the Forest, Stellar Drift, and Solstice are the go-to talents in Mythic Plus. Wild Charge also a go-to. And then when it comes to row, like the 30 row and the 35 row, it's really dependent on what your want specifically. I'm running Guardian Affinity here because I want Incap Roar. Incap Roar is the AoE disorient that you get by running Guardian Affinity. And I think that's really good in this dungeon specifically, in halls, because you can interrupt the hunters that are enraging the dogs. They cast Loyal Beasts when they reach 30% HP. And if the cast goes through, they're enraging all of the dogs. And that's usually very deadly for your tank. So even though you can soothe the enrage effect, of course, it's still better, in my opinion, to just interrupt the ability at the very start, right? And then I run Mighty Bash just to have an extra interrupt again. Mass Root I don't think helps much because we have Sanguine here in this key. I don't think Mass Entanglement really does anything. And Heart of the Wild can be good, but I'm running Guardian Affinity, so it's not that incredibly great, considering that you don't get the extra healing, you just get the more HP and like an extra frenzied region, basically. All right, so we're going in here, we're starting the key. I didn't actually pull Astral Power here, so as you can see, I'm pretty low on Astral Power just because I didn't do the pre-pull. We do this initial pull, and I'm actually pre-moonfiring here before I use all of my cooldowns. Depending on the situation, I either pre-moonfire or I don't, because the way Convoke works is that if you already have Moonfire on all of the targets, then it doesn't waste abilities on Moonfire. Moonfire is, of course, one of the worst abilities it can cast, because you would much rather have it cast Star Surges, Full Moons, Solar Rafts, whatever, because they all do more damage than Moonfire. So that's why sometimes, depending on the level of the key and depending on the pull, I do put my Moonfires before I Convoke. Now, the more targets there are, the less good it actually is to put all of your Moonfires before you Convoke. But because it's a 19 key, I figured the pull is going to be long enough for me to actually get a value out of my Incarnation and putting the Moonfires beforehand. But if I would be playing a lower key, there wouldn't have been a point for me to put Moonfires before I Convoke, because then the mobs would have been dead before I even press my Convoke, because it takes a long time to put Moonfire and everything, right? So really, you have to think about the situation. How much HP do I have? How long is this pull going to last? Is it worth it to put Moonfire in all of these beforehand? Or are they just going to be dead once I'm done Moonfiring, right? Okay, so the next pull happened here. Unfortunately, we actually knocked one of the Houndmasters down, but thankfully he cast Loyal Beast downstairs, and therefore he didn't buff those dogs. Now in this pull, our tank needs to kite a little, because we don't have a lot of damage anymore in this pull, because it turned out that everyone used the cooldowns on the first pull, with Bloodlust as well, and then we didn't end up having a lot of damage here anymore. You can see the way I approach this pack is by, I'm just keeping up my Starfall at all times, right? You can see my Starfall is always up. And then you can see that I'm just like cycling in to eclipses as much as I can. That's like a number one mistake that a lot of people are making when they play Moonkin in dungeons, is they either don't keep Starfall up 100% of the time, which is already a mistake. If there's more than one mob, you keep Starfall up all the time. You don't prioritize Star Search anymore. Like, more than one mob, Starfall, okay? Another mistake that people are making is that they don't cycle into eclipses. I know I keep mentioning this all the time, but I still think that there's many people who don't necessarily understand this about Moonkins with the eclipse system. The eclipse system gives us a nature damage increase in solar eclipse and arcane damage increase in lunar eclipse. And our Starfall is astral damage. That is nature and arcane damage mixed. So Starfall does more damage in solar eclipse, and it also does more damage in lunar eclipse. And also our dots are doing more damage in eclipse. And the more often you enter eclipse, the more our solstice does, and the more our balance of all things legendary does. So cycling into eclipses is incredibly important. So definitely make sure you're cycling as much as you can. I'm approaching a pack here. As you can see, I put some Moonfires as I was approaching this pack. Then I pressed Starfall, and now I'm entering my eclipse as fast as I can. Now, I delayed my Starfall here a little bit because the pack was far apart and I couldn't spread my Sunfire immediately. So instead of Sunfiring, I put some Moonfires first because I don't want to waste too many globals applying Sunfire, right? If you know that your Sunfire is not going to go on all of the mobs immediately if you press it because they're too far spread, then you should put Moonfires first, right? But if the pack is stacked up, if the pack is stacked up, then you definitely want to put Sunfire first, right? If you know your Sunfire is going to go on all of them, then Sunfire first. If you think your Sunfire is not going to hit all of them when the tank is pulling, then maybe put some Moonfire first or go into Eclipse first before you apply your Sunfire. All right, so now we're done with this pack. We're moving on here. We already had one of the Pride mobs. My cooldowns are about to get ready, as you can see in my on my weak grass here below my Astra power bar. You can see my Celestial Lament is ready and my Convoke is ready in 4 seconds. So I definitely want to use my cooldowns on this next pack. Very likely, unless something very, like unless a call happened. Like maybe our tank set save cooldowns for next pull, or the hunter said I'm going to use my cooldowns here or whatever. So in this case, you can see I'm applying my Sunfire. I'm applying Moonfires here again because I'm about to Convoke, right? Depending on the amount of mobs, I want to Moonfire more or less, but it looks like I'm actually applying quite a few Moonfires here. One more thing I want to note here actually is I think the reason why I applied so many Moonfires here, because when I saw this happening as I was looking at it, I was like thinking, why would I apply so many Moonfires here? Because these Groundkeepers, they don't have a lot of HP. So applying a lot of Moonfires here before the Convoke seemed like a waste of time. But then I realized why I was doing this, because you see the Quaking bar above my player frame here? This is a weak card that shows when Quaking is about to appear. And the Quaking was just about to happen, so I couldn't actually Convoke, because if you Convoke right before Quaking, the Quaking actually interrupts your Convoke. So in this scenario, I probably saw, oh, Quaking is about to happen. So I probably figured, you know what, okay, let's just apply some Moonfires before we Convoke, because otherwise my Convoke is just going to get interrupted anyway. So you can see Quaking is about to happen. That's why I'm applying a lot of Moonfires here. And now I can Convoke as soon as the Quaking timer is out. I Star Searched before I Convoked because I wanted to make sure I'm not overcapping Astral Power, but I wasn't in an Eclipse, so it's a pretty bad Star Search. It's really an optional thing to do in this case because sometimes you don't generate that much Astral Power. I got a Full Moon here in this pull. That's why I'm doing that much damage. Unfortunately, our healer died here because it was actually a pretty insane pull, considering that we pulled a bunch of casters plus a shard plus the Groundkeepers. So that's why this was a pretty risky pull, and it turned out that it didn't actually go that well considering our healer died and we had to start kiting backwards toward the entrance. One thing to note here that is not Moonkin related is that this Thrash cast here can be outranged, as you can see. Where I was standing there, I didn't actually get any damage. So if you're a Moonkin, you definitely want to make sure you're outranging this ability to not take any damage, because as a Moonkin, we have 45 yards range anyway, which is a huge amount of range, and the Thrash can already be outranged at like 35, I believe. So you're more than fine to outrange this and still do a lot of damage. As you can see, I'm outranging again, not taking any damage by this Thrash, and now we're just finishing off this shard. So yeah, I used my cooldowns in this pull, considering that it was a pretty huge pull, and I just had my cooldowns ready. So cooldowns on first pack and cooldowns on this pack. Now we get the Pride mob. I don't have any cooldowns. On higher keys, you definitely want to make sure you're using some sort of cooldowns on this manifestation of Pride, at least one in your group, right? You don't all want to use your cooldowns on this, but at least one of you should be using a cooldown. You can see our Hunter and our Rogue are doing an insane amount of damage to this manifestation of Pride, while I'm only doing 3k DPS. So they definitely used their cooldowns because I had used my cooldowns already in the pack before, so I just didn't have anything, right? Then you can see we're going into the next pull here. I'm immediately taunting with my trees, as you can see, and then I apply my Sunfire, and then I Starfall, and then I go into Eclipse. This is my order here on a stacked pull, right? So in a stacked pull, the order of abilities that I'm casting, if we disregard the Force of Nature, because Force of Nature, of course, you don't always cast it in pull, but disregarding the Force of Nature, the rotation I do is Sunfire, Starfall, and then entering Eclipse in this order, okay? Don't waste any time doing anything else if they're all stacked up. And that's exactly what I'm doing here, right? If you go back a little, you can see I'm my tank probably called to put my trees there. So I put trees, Sunfire, Starfall is already up, and then I go just cast Starfires to enter the Eclipse. So now I'm in Solar Eclipse. In Solar Eclipse, if you have more than 8 targets, then it's actually worth it to cast Starfires instead of Solar Wrath for the maximum amount of damage. But usually, depending on the situation, I actually might want to apply dots instead of casting the Starfire, right? Depending on how fast they die. Because you don't really want to apply Moonfires outside of Eclipse, of course, because if you're outside of Eclipse, you're doing it wrong, right? You want to spend the least amount possible outside of your Eclipse. You always want to be in Eclipses, right? So you don't want to cast your Moonfires in Lunar Eclipse, because in Lunar Eclipse, you want to Starfire on AoE, right? Because Starfire does huge amounts of damage on AoE, especially if you have a lot of mobs. So in that case, if you're doing an AoE pull, let's say there's 8 mobs, and you know that those 8 mobs are actually alive for a pretty long time, so it's worth it to cast your Moonfires in Solar Eclipse. So you get that extra bonus when you're in Lunar Eclipse, and you can Starfire. But if the mobs don't live for a long time, then it's probably not worth it to apply your Moonfires in Solar Eclipse, and you rather just Starfire, right? When there's 8 or more mobs. If there's less than 8 mobs, then it's not worth it to Starfire in Solar Eclipse. All right, you can see here that I am outranging the Thrash again. We have 4 mobs. So on these 4 mobs, I'm definitely trying to keep my dots up, and I'm focusing the Shard here because the Shard is the mob with the most HP. So definitely want to make sure I'm getting my focus target on the Shard and cleaving down the rest of the casters, unless you know, we run out of interrupts and you want to kill them. So now we pulled the Shard over here because the tank was probably having some issues. So that's why I'm going to the other side here. I also Typhooned this Obliterator out of the Sanguine on the floor to make sure it's not healing. And I'm also outranging the Shard at the same time, going to the other side away from the tank. So I also used my cooldowns again on this pull. As you can see, my Celestial Alignment and my Convocus and cooldown again. So now we're moving on. We're actually skipping something here. That's why I'm going stealth, just to make sure I'm not pulling anything on accident. Even though you don't have to go stealth, but yeah, just making sure. So now I apply my Sunfire again, and now I cast my Starfires to enter Eclipse. I didn't have enough Astral Power to cast a Starfall, so I immediately cast my Starfall as I entered Eclipse, and now I'm applying the Moonfires because I'm in Solar Eclipse, and that's the only time where I really want to apply Moonfires. Then I'm casting Starfall here on my trees to make sure that they're taunting, and then I cycle into Lunar Eclipse. And now that I'm in Lunar Eclipse, I keep my Starfall up and I Starfire. I'm just Starfiring. Of course, it's really hard here to keep up with the Hunter's DPS because the Hunter was using cooldowns here, and I don't have any cooldowns, so definitely a hard task to keep up. But I did try my best. As you can see, I'm still doing like 7k DPS on those mobs. I also was in Solar Eclipse at the start, which also tanks your DPS a little. So now we are pulling that Manifestation of Pride. I'm just trying to min-max my damage here without using my cooldowns because we're doing the boss afterwards, and you can see my Celestial Alignment is about to be ready in 20 seconds. So that means that I want to use my cooldowns on the boss with the Pride. So in that case, we can see the Rogue actually used his cooldowns on this. As you can see in the damage meter, just explaining my damage meters real quick, the top one is the current fight, and the bottom damage meter here is overall damage, in case you're wondering, okay? So you can see the Rogue actually used his cooldowns on his Pride to make sure we don't die. One more thing to note is that you also want to use your Innervate accordingly, depending on what's happening. Let me pause real quick explaining Innervate here. If your healer is not communicating with you with Innervates, then make sure you Innervate the healer before the Pride spawns, if it's required, on a pack, if it's really or otherwise you always want to Innervate while you're fighting the Pride mob, okay? So when you're fighting the Pride mob and the healer is running really low on mana, because that's usually a time where the healer runs because you basically do a trash pack, which requires a lot of healing by the healer already, and then immediately afterwards the Pride mob spawns, right? meaning the healer doesn't have time to drink, and then he has to heal a Pride Mob, which also does a lot of AoE damage. So that's almost always the time where the healers want their innovates, because after the Pride Mob is dead, we get the Pride buff, which gives you mana regen. So then the healer doesn't need to innovate anymore. Definitely doesn't need to innovate after Pride Mob is dead. So definitely make sure you innovate the healer when you're doing Pride, and you can see the healer struggling a little bit with mana. All right, so now we're pulling the boss here. We're bloodlusting as well. I'm just trying to get rid of my Astral Power here and applying my dots, okay? Because I definitely want to make sure that I don't overcap Astral Power and that my Convoke is not wasting any time moonfiring. So that's why I made sure I Star Searched, making sure I got rid of my Astral Power, but I still managed to go into Eclipse. So I still want to make sure I benefit off the Balance of All Things buff, but I still get rid of my Astral Power. And then I used all of my cooldowns. I made sure that I'm not convoking right before Quaking comes up. That's actually a mistake I made quite a bit this week with the Quaking affix, because this was like the first time I played with Quaking and Convoke. And I really had to get used to the fact that you're not supposed to cast Convoke right before Quaking comes up. So I really had to get used to the fact to just like check my weak aura to make sure I know exactly when Quaking is about to appear, so I'm not losing a lot of damage, because it's infuriating if you use all of your cooldowns and then your Convoke gets interrupted. So definitely make sure you're paying attention to that specifically. And after that, the boss is just dying. We're gonna do some more trash pulls here. I'm out of cooldowns again, and I'm also out of Astral Power. So this is gonna be a little bit of an unfortunate pull for me. Probably not gonna do that much damage considering all of those things. But we can see that tank pulled something on the other side. So I applied my Sandfire to those ads. And now I'm waiting until they're all stacked to go into my Solar Eclipse. I actually think I died. No, okay, never mind. I didn't die here. I just pressed my... I basically went into melee range because I had aggro a little, right? And if you have aggro, you want to make sure you go close to the tank. That's also a mistake a lot of people make. If you have aggro, don't run away. Because depending on what you have aggro from, you probably survive like a melee hit, right? Unless it's like a boss or something. But if it's like some random trash mob, you usually survive a melee hit if you use any sort of defensive, right? If you use Bark Skin or you use whatever defensive you have, you probably survive one melee attack. And then it's much better to go into melee range, because the tank cannot get aggro off of you if he doesn't have taunt ready and you're in ranged, right? If you're running away from the tank, how could he possibly get aggro off of you, right? And that's the only thing that can save you. The only thing that will save you is someone taunting off the mob. You can't, I mean, yes, you can just kite it forever, but yeah. So definitely make sure you go in melee range, and that's why I went into melee range there, and then I put the trees down to make sure the trees are tanking, okay? So that was my thought process here. So I went into melee range, put the trees down because I had aggro, then I disengaged out to make sure I'm not getting hit by any cleave, because some of these mobs here have cleave. The Dark Blade here, for example, has a frontal cleave, so definitely want to make sure you're not idling in melee for too much. So I actually did quite a lot of damage here, interestingly enough, even though I didn't have any cooldowns. So I'm going to go back a little because I didn't actually comment on what I was doing. The reason, okay, now I can see the reason why I did so much damage, even though I didn't have cooldowns, and it's because I was in Lunar Eclipse and I was just spamming Starfire. So you can see there's so many ads here. I'm pressing my trees, I'm going out, I'm Starfalling, and I'm going into Lunar Eclipse. And if you Starfire in Lunar Eclipse, it does a huge amount of damage. So you can see I'm not even applying Moonfires here in this case. I'm only Starfiring and applying my Starfall. And you can see how much damage I'm doing by just spamming Starfire. And now I'm entering the next Eclipse again, making sure I reapply my Sunfire, making sure I reapply my Starfall. And now I'm in Solar Eclipse. Of course, Solar Eclipse is not as good as Lunar Eclipse, so that's why I'm trying to use some utility here. I used Roar, making sure our tank can kite a little, because our tank was having some issues. And then I'm entering my Lunar Eclipse again and just like Starfiring, right? So yeah, some people... something you have to understand as a Moonkin is that Moonfire is really not as important as some people think it is. Some people think you have to apply your Moonfire at all costs, but it's actually not the case, okay? You can see how much damage I'm doing here, and I barely applied any Moonfires. And that's because if you apply Moonfires in Lunar Eclipse, for example, then you're losing so much damage because you're not Starfiring. If there's like 10 mobs and you're in Lunar Eclipse, you are Starfiring. And if you're not Starfiring, you're losing a lot of damage, okay? So there's a bunch of times where you just don't really have the time to Moonfire. If you're outside of Eclipse, you don't want to Moonfire because you want to be inside Eclipse, right? Idling outside and applying Moonfires is just bad. So that's the first thing you don't want to do. Don't idle outside of Eclipse. Don't Moonfire outside of Eclipse. Then if you're in Lunar Eclipse, you don't want to Moonfire, right? Because you want to Starfire to get the most cleave damage out of your Starfire because we're running Soul of the Forest. So in this scenario, if you enter Lunar Eclipse at the start of a pool, then you just don't have the time to apply your Moonfires, like for a long time, right? Because at the start, you don't have the time to apply Moonfires because you're outside of Eclipse and you want to go in to Eclipse. So you don't have the time to apply Moonfires. And then you're in Lunar Eclipse and you don't want to apply Moonfires again because you want to Starfire, right? So in that scenario, this pull that just happened was the perfect example of why sometimes it's okay to not apply your Moonfires. Of course, if I would have entered Solar Eclipse as my first Eclipse in this pack, then maybe it would have been worth it for me to apply those Moonfires, depending on how long the fight lasts. Or maybe I still would have just Starfired in Solar Eclipse, depending how low HP the mobs are. So now that we killed the Pride, we're actually stealthing to the boss. I have all of my cooldowns ready here, so I'm probably just going to cast them as we go. Yeah, I immediately just use my cooldowns here because I know Quaking is not about to happen, and it's just like a lot of damage on the boss, and we have Pride and everything. So I just use my cooldowns immediately. So now that the Stone Fiends spawn, I make sure I Starfall to make sure I get a lot of damage on these Stone Fiends, and then I'm just Starfiring. You can see I'm just Starfiring here to make sure I get a lot of cleave on those Stone Fiends as they're stacked on a boss. And then I just continue my single target rotation, my normal one, making sure I reapply my dots on Echelon here once the Stone Fiends are dead. And of course, I'm also helping out with interrupting the Stone Fiends with Solar Beam, with Incap Roar. You can also interrupt them. You can interrupt them with Typhoon. There's a bunch of things I can do in this key to help out with the utility as well. Not just with damage, because Moonkins are really strong damage-wise, but we're also really strong utility-wise. So definitely make sure you utilize your utility as much as you can. So on this fight here, you can dispel yourself, for example. This fight, he applies a curse, the Curse of Stone, on everyone. And that's actually a curse which you can dispel as a Moonkin. I always dispel myself, but if you're the only curse dispeller, then it might actually be worth it for you to dispel the person who gets the jump. So the person with the jump needs to position themselves to kill off the Stone Fiends because they don't actually die. They are just half dead, basically. So you need to kill them with the jump of the boss. Otherwise, they respawn. One more thing to mention, actually, is that you can dodge the jump of Echelon if you're not doing it wrong like I did just there. Because you can position yourself properly with the jump, and then before the boss actually leaps on you, you can move out of the location, right? If you're not stunned by the Curse of Stone. So you can do this by wild charging in stack form, wild charging in friendly form, wild charging to like an at or to the boss, or you can also use your blink if you're a Night Fae. Okay, so there's a bunch of movement abilities you can do to actually dodge the actual leap of the boss. You still want to make sure you position it properly though, and as the boss is leaping, you have like half a second or a second to leap out of the impact point. Because the impact does a lot of damage and it leaves a dot behind on you, which ticks for a lot. Alright, so this pull here, let me pause this real quick because this is a really important pull because it does a huge amount of damage to your tank. Unfortunately, I don't have my cooldowns ready here, or I only have Convoke, so I'm not going to be a huge help here. But this pull is definitely something where you want to min-max your damage. I'm going into Lunar Eclipse here, as you can see. I'm trying to get enough Starfall, get enough Astral Power for a Starfall. And then I'm just making sure I'm Starfiring as much as I can to get the cleave damage out. But it's really hard to do a lot of damage here without my cooldowns. You can see I'm reapplying my Starfall all the time on cooldown, keeping Starfall up all the time. And now I'm cycling into eclipses, yeah? I'm just going in and out of eclipses. Thankfully, I actually got my cooldowns back up, and I'm just using them because I know how difficult this pack is. And I'm just making sure I'm getting my damage out here, right? Depending on the level of the key, I might have not used my cooldowns here because the pack was already about to die, right? The pack was already really low. And I could have said, you know what, I'm saving my cooldowns for the boss. But because this pack is really difficult on a tank, because there's dogs and there's 2 Houndmasters who are buffing the dogs. So that's why I figured I'm using my cooldowns here. So I actually tried to Typhoon the Houndmaster out of the Sanguine here, but our tank unfortunately charged the mob at the same time as I was Typhooning. That was just like really unlucky timing, because the charge of a Guardian Druid actually makes the mob immobile, like it's a root basically. So, and a mob that is rooted cannot be knocked. So that was just like really unfortunate timing, because the tank wanted to get back in and I Typhooned at the same time. So it was just like standing there in Sanguine. Right, so now we're just finishing off these Houndmasters. I'm making sure I'm interrupting them as much as I can. Using my Incap Roar and all of these kind of abilities that I have to make sure I'm interrupting the Loyal Beast cast. Of course, the dogs are dead at this point, so the Loyal Beast cast doesn't do anything anymore, but still want to make sure that I'm interrupting as much as I can and helping out. So now we go to the boss. We don't have any sort of cooldowns here. I don't have Pride, I don't have Celestial Alignment, I don't have Convoke, so this might take a little while, this boss fight, but this boss fight is not actually that hard. And it's not tyrannical. So this shouldn't be as big of a deal as long as you interrupt properly. So this boss casts Volley of Power, and you want to make sure you have an interrupt rotation to interrupt all of those volleys, because the volley can be really annoying, and it's just doing a lot of damage to your group. So definitely make sure you interrupt it or have an interrupt rotation in your group. Right, so after this boss room, there's a very interesting boss room that is really good for Moonkins. But there's one thing I want to let you know that a lot of people actually do wrong. And it's the fact that these neutral mobs here, the neutrals that you see, they need to die, okay? Not the small mobs that spawn out of them, the envy mobs, the not neutral ones. A lot of people are playing this room wrong. A lot of people are just like AoEing, which of course you have to AoE, but you need to AoE on the correct targets. Because if you're AoEing the small ones, or you just like AoEing off of the big mob of the mini boss, then you're just basically prolonging this fight. Because this mini boss here, Inquisitor Seagar, after like every once in a while he casts like Dark Communion. And when he casts that, he's basically leeching HP from the tormented souls and healing himself up. So if you don't focus those tormented souls, if you just focusing the manifestation of envy, then you basically are healing the boss and you're just prolonging this boss fight. So you can see here, this is actually the perfect example. You can see how I'm trying to finish off these souls. And you can see the mini boss is already at like 70% HP. So somehow somebody got him to 70% HP, which is completely wasted damage because he's just gonna heal back up. So in this case, any sort of damage that is not being done to these tormented souls is completely like wasted damage. Of course, the manifestations of envy need to die as well, but they can die after the tormented souls, right? So in this case, always just focus those neutrals. And you can see the boss here, it's at 70% HP, and he's going to heal to full HP in just a minute because there's still some tormented souls alive. I'm trying, see, right now, he's casting Dark Communion, and you can see those tiny little tormented souls that just have a slither of HP are going to heal the boss to full. So now he's full HP, and he also spawned the manifestation of envy because we didn't kill them in time. So definitely didn't play this room 100% perfectly. But to be fair, the other two classes also don't have that much like that great of a damage profile to be able to hit them as much as I do. Of course, Moonkins are really great at hitting them. So in this case, what I did to maximize my damage on those neutral mobs was I made sure I keep Starfall up, of course, and I made sure I'm applying Sandfires on the neutral mobs, and I'm just casting Starfires or applying Moonfires as I go, depending on which eclipse I'm in right now. So yeah, that's what I was doing here. Now we have the boss by itself. You can see my cooldowns are still 1 minute 40 for Celestial Alignment and 40 seconds for Incarnation. It might be close to get my cooldowns back up for the boss, but as long as I get my cooldowns with the Pride, then it doesn't matter. That's also one thing I want to let you guys know. Some people think that you need to get your cooldowns at the start of the boss fight at all costs, right? Like some people think, oh, if I don't have my cooldowns at the start of the boss, then I'm just going to do no damage. But that's not actually true, right? Because if a boss fight lasts, let's say, 2 minutes, which approximately that's what a boss fight lasts on 45 on this level of key, right? If a boss fight lasts 2 minutes, then you're only going to get one set of cooldowns anyway, yeah? So it doesn't actually matter if you get your cooldowns on a pull, or if you get them 1 minute into the fight, or if you get them 1 minute 30 into the fight, as long as you get the cooldowns on the boss. The only thing that matters is if you actually get the Bloodlust on your cooldowns and the Pride buff. Now, of course, if you're getting Pride, and your cooldowns are getting ready right after the Pride buff is gone, then that's bad. Then that's definitely something that you don't want. But as long as you get your cooldowns inside the Pride buff, then you're fine, right? And in this scenario, my cooldowns are actually going to be ready right as this manifestation of Pride dies, so I'm not going to lose any uptime here. But even if my cooldowns would have gotten ready like 30 seconds after the Pride is dead, it still would have been fine because I still would have gotten my cooldowns within the Pride buff, because the Pride buff lasts 60 seconds. So as long as you get your cooldowns within the 60 seconds window, you're fine. But yeah, in this scenario, I actually have all of my cooldowns ready. I'm using my Astral Power here to make sure I'm not overcapping my Astral Power. I'm making sure that the quaking is far enough away so I'm not getting interrupted by quaking. And then I'm just maximizing my damage here. I'm casting Wraths, of course, because this is only one target. If you're in Celestial Alignment and you're one target, you cast Wrath. If there's more than one target and you can cleave, then you cast Starfire in your Celestial Alignment. So now I'm cycling back into my Solar Eclipse, making sure I'm maximizing the damage of my boat cast. And unfortunately, our hunter actually went down here as we had the Ritual of Woe, which actually does quite a lot of damage. So definitely want to make sure you use one of your defensives here as you're soaking the Ritual, because it just hits for quite a lot. So yeah, that's this dungeon here basically. I really hoped some things that I mentioned as I walked through this dungeon helped you out with your damage. The dungeons are usually going really quickly, so it's hard for me to exactly explain my rotation, but I'm going to do more of these videos in the future to let you know exactly how my thought process goes for each dungeon, for different affixes, for different levels of keys, for tyrannical, fortified, and so on. So I hope this helped you out specifically for Halls of Atonement, and it helped you out for the affix combination maybe, and just giving you a general idea on how to use your abilities on AoE as Moonkin. Alright, nothing special more to say. The boss is about to die. We still have 3 minutes left, so we actually had a pretty good time here. We did have 2 deaths, so definitely not a perfect run. We also got some Sanguine heal here and there, and we got some issues with the trash once in a while. But outside of that, we definitely did a good job. And you can see I did 8.1k overall damage here in this dungeon. Of course, one thing I wanted to note before this is over, I just want to say that the overall damage that you do in a dungeon is heavily dependent on the affixes, the level of the key, and your setup, right? Because in this key, I'm playing with a rogue. A rogue is just not that good right now. Like, rogues just don't do a lot of AoE damage. That's just how it is. And a hunter. So I don't have like a mage or anything in this group who is like combusting. I don't have any other like huge AoE burst classes. I mean, I do have a hunter, and hunter do have a lot of AoE burst, but we made sure that we are not using our cooldowns at the very same time, the hunter and I, right? So this is why I managed to get such a high DPS number in this dungeon. Depending on the key or the affixes or the setup, I might not be able to get this much damage, right? Like if I play with a mage here, the trash packs are not going to stay alive for that long, and I might not be able to get that much damage out. So that's definitely something you need to keep in mind when you look at the damage. Don't compare your damage with someone else's damage, because it also totally depends on the route that your tank is doing as well. Like if you need to use your cooldowns on the pride mob every time because no one else is using their cooldowns on the pride mob, and otherwise you're wiping, well, then you're probably going to be lower on damage, because single target cooldowns are, of course, pushing your damage less than AoE cooldowns, right? So definitely just keep this in mind. And don't strive for a damage number that you cannot achieve if you're not doing the same level of keys, having the same setup, or having the same route, okay? But yeah, that was it. I hope this helped you out a little. And if you actually thought this helped you, then just let me know in the comments below, because I can do more of these kind of videos if you think they're helpful. But I really just want to know if you really care about stuff like this. Because if you're not interested in this kind of commentary and you would rather just watch my stream as I'm doing keys, then I'm not going to make any more of these YouTube videos. But if it really helped you out and there's actually something you learned, then just let me know in the comments below. Let me know what other things you want to know that I should be talking about as I go through a dungeon. Maybe there's something I forgot to mention or I didn't go into detail about that you wanted to know. Just let me know in the comments below. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, guys. Remember to subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet for more videos like these in the future. And check out my Twitch stream over at twitch.tv Naguura if you want to ask any sort of questions. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys and have a nice day. Bye!